Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you are doing your geometry. This is 10.00 for geometry. I split this lesson into two different days, so we're actually going to call this one 10.00A. And we're just going to talk about converting between radians and degrees. So you guys have maybe heard a little bit about radians before, but I don't think you've worked much with it in the past. So just think of when you measure the temperature outside, you can measure it in either Fahrenheit or Celsius. When we measure an angle, we can measure that angle in either radians or degrees. But just like with Celsius and Fahrenheit, you can still convert between the two. So if you measure it in Celsius, you can convert it to Fahrenheit. And same thing with radians and degrees. Radians are usually dealt with in terms of pi, but they don't always have a pi in them. The main conversion factor that you need to remember is that in pi radians, there's going to be 180 degrees. And these next two lessons are both really important, especially this one today for next year. And in Algebra 2, you guys are going to do a lot more work in radians. You're going to talk about something called the unit circle, which you're going to do in radians. And it's really important, and that stuff will carry over into pre-calc and calculus as well. So really important, just a foundation of understanding how to convert between the two. So to convert between the two, at this point, we usually use a proportion. So we say that since there are pi radians is equal to 180 degrees, we set that equal to how many radians over how many degrees. So sometimes we even just write it as pi over 180 equals r over d, meaning radians over degrees. And you also have a little conversion. You don't have the proportion on your reference sheet, but you have a little, it does tell you on there, a conversion. I like the proportion better. I see students have a lot more success using the proportion. And then sometimes students, once they start to realize what's happening, when they use it a lot, they can shorten it up a little bit too. And we'll talk about that as we go. So here is your circle. We're talking about radians. So in a full circle, there's 360 degrees. That would be 2 pi because pi is 180. So half the circle is 180 degrees. That's the same thing as saying there's pi radians in half that circle. There's 2 pi radians in that full circle. And we don't have a symbol to represent radians like we do for degrees, the little circle. There's just no unit for it. So let's start. We're going to convert from radians to degrees. Now, these ones we actually have a quick trick for. If you're given a pi in radians and asked to convert to degrees, we're going to use our quick trick. Our quick trick is that we're just going to substitute in. So we know pi radians equals 180 degrees. So I'm going to take 180 and sub it in for pi. So 180 degrees divided by 4 gives me 45 degrees. So pi over 4 radians is equal to 45 degrees. That's 180 divided by 4. And a lot of this stuff you'll actually end up memorizing next year as well when you talk about that unit circle. Number 2, convert 3.5 radians. So no pi is given. So if there's not a pi given, then you need to use the proportion. And the proportion we're going to use to convert from radians to degrees and also from degrees to radians. So it's very useful. So we're going to always start with what we know for sure. We know pi radians is equal to 180. And so then we set that equal to, radians is always going to go across from the pi, and degrees is always going to go across from the 180. And I just put x instead of d. And now we're going to cross multiply. So we get pi times x equals 180 times 3.5, which is 630. Divide both sides by pi. Now this does not tell us to round, so technically you would want to leave your answer as an exact value. So that'd be 630 over pi degrees. If it did say to round, then you would put it in your calculator. And don't type in 180. You want to type in 630 divided by the pi key. Very important that you use the pi key, which is on the caret button above the division symbol. You don't want to do it 180 because you only sub in the 180 when you're converting from radians to degrees. This is already in degrees. So if I type in 630 divided by pi, it gives me about 200.5352283 degrees. So that would be an approximate value because that decimal continues. So exact would be 630 over pi degrees, approximate 200.5352283 degrees. All right, now let's go the other direction. So let's convert from degrees to radians. So we don't have a quick trick here besides memorizing these. And the two that I gave you right here are very common ones that you will memorize for next year. We're going to start with our proportion. So pi over 180 equals radians, which is what I'm solving for, over degrees, which is 90. Again, radians always goes across from the pi, degrees across from the 180, cross multiply, and solve. 180 times x equals 90 pi. Solve for x by dividing by 180. Now here what you can do is reduce in your calculator. So you might be able to reduce this in your head, but if not, and if it's a harder one, just type in the 90 over 180 into your calculator and then hit math frac or just hit enter if you have a newer calculator and get that reduced fraction form. So when you type in 90 over 180, do not type in the pi because it won't reduce the fraction for you if you do. So you're just typing 90 divided by 180, hit enter, and it should give you 1/2. So instead of writing 1/2 pi, we usually just write pi over 2. So you bring that down. So 90 degrees is equal to pi over 2 radians. Does that make sense? Well, think about our quick trick. We know pi radians is equal to 180 degrees. If I sub in 180 in for this pi, 180 divided by 2 gives me 90. So here would be a good time to pause the video and try number 4 on your own. All right, so hopefully you were able to set up your proportion pi over 180 equals x for radians over 30 degrees. Cross multiply, we get 30 pi equals 180x, divide by 180. And then again, you want to reduce. So put 30 over 180 into your calculator, should give you 1/6. So x radians is equal to pi over 6. And again, do a quick check. 180 divided by 6 gives me 30. So what you might start to realize as you do more and more of these is that every time you're converting from degrees to radians, you're just multiplying essentially by pi over 180. When you're going from degrees to radians, you're multiplying by pi over 180. So just divide whatever they're giving you by 180, reduce that fraction, and slap a pi on the top, and you're done. So that's one of those quick tricks as you do more, you might start to realize, and that might work for you. If not, there's a lot of students that just stick with the proportion the whole time. But that's what you'll see, this pi over 180 on your reference table. Okay, so pause the video here and try 5 and 6 on your own. Okay, so hopefully you got your answer. Here, I'll run through it real quick since this is new. So pi over 180, I'm going to call it r this time, over 38, cross multiply. We get 38 pi equals 180 r, divide by 180. So again here, notice you're always dividing by 180 and then adding that pi on the top. So if I math frac that in my calculator, just hit enter, it gives me 19 over 90. And then I just bring along my pi since I didn't want to type that in. So, and I didn't want to type it in because then it wouldn't have reduced my fraction for me. So 38 degrees is equal to 19 pi over 90. To check it, do 19 times 180 divided by 90. And number 6, we're going to convert 3 pi over 9 to degrees. So 2 options here. You can just substitute in your 180 and you get 540 over 9, which is 60. Or you might have reduced that first. You might have said, oh, well, 3 pi over 9 is pi over 3, and then subbed in your 180. 180 over 3 is 60. Either way would work here. Okay, so that is all we're going to do for today. And then next class, we'll talk about what's the length of an arc and finding the area of a sector. So today, just converting, really important. So not a huge lesson, but a very, very important one, which is why I want you guys to really make sure that you understand it and can do it pretty quickly and easily and really understand it. So if you do have questions, please let me know. And I hope to see you guys soon. I hope you're doing well, and bye out.